Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, so much to talk about this week and in the coming weeks as the Kraken are undergoing a pretty seismic shift, arguably the biggest shift that they have ever had to experience, with Ron Francis and the team mutually agreeing to part ways at the end of the season. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about, of course, the Todd Lewicki presser that came after that decision was announced. We'll talk about, there's so many things built into all of this, but for the first time really in Seattle Kraken franchise history, they're going to be moving forward without Ron Francis in some way, shape, or form being at the helm.
Yeah, this is the first deep dive podcast ever host Ron Francis. And it's
not technically. There's 2 games left.
Oh yeah, you're right.
It is at the end of the year.
Never mind. All right, you gotta bring me down. Okay, that's fine.
Save it a week.
That's fine. Okay, fair enough. But big decisions being made here. This one's going to be about big picture stuff, pretty much exclusively. I know the team's been playing games over the past week, but I think that's what everybody is wondering about, are these big picture decisions. And a lot of it's still maybe, pending or coming. There's going to be lots of talks of the audit. We're going to talk all about that. But pretty big podcast this week.
Yeah, definitely. And so won't waste too much time. We'll want to dive into this right away. But of course, first we got to thank our wonderful sponsor for the podcast, the law offices of Rico Tessendor. And RJ, you know, I were just talking before we started recording, and you had a great line about how it was Fan Appreciation Night yesterday. And today, Sponsor Appreciation Day. And then go for it.
Yeah, we sure do appreciate Rico. And I was joking, we should do just like a t-shirt toss or something. They did so much for the fans last night at the game. Just like throw some t-shirts just at Rico by himself. Do some giveaway. Give him an Amazon gift card, something like that.
Yeah. Use the t-shirt gun just right at one person. And
I don't think a personal injury attorney is the person that you want to do that to.
You think? Is it a conflict of interest if he represents himself?
Yeah.
Not the Bratzuka. Just line somebody up with the Bratzuka. That's not how it's done. Probably do the Starbucks gift cards from the rafters. We could probably do
that's a little safer.
We'll have to find some rafters, but I think we can manage that one. But definitely want to, as the season is winding down, one more time, just thank Rico for sponsoring the pod, for reaching out, for being a loyal supporter of this podcast and all of the work that we've done at Emerald City Hockey. I mean, again, that's how this all started, this partnership with him. And so definitely want to appreciate in our own way a very big fan of ours. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say that at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Now, RJ, the news was announced that Ron Francis would be parting ways with the team. I think everybody kind of understands the situation as far as this being a mutual parting of ways, that, look, he was probably not going to be back. His contract was up after this year. I don't think the Kraken were going to renew said contract. And this was just kind of a way for everybody to save face a little bit, that the 5 years had kind of run out. We knew about the 3 to 5 year plan announced way back before the expansion draft, and here we are 5 years later, and outside of one now seeming even more miraculous playoff run in year 2, the team just hasn't found a way to take a step forward and really be competitive consistently.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the situation this team is in, and they inherited a blank slate, and it is basically a bottom 5 team in the NHL at this point. There's no real current or future stars. And as Todd Lewicki said at his media availability, he said, no one is satisfied. We have not delivered on the promise of this team. And Personally, I think that's pretty clear. I think it's been clear for a while now. This is a move, at least having Francis out of the org, that I've called for now at least a year and a half
Mhm.
publicly, and that I had been thinking about it for a while prior. This absolutely needed to happen, and I think it got to the point where it was so obvious that there was no other option.
Yeah, there really wasn't. I mean, e even without the kind of epic collapse that the Kraken have experienced here post-Olympic break, I mean, we've talked about it, right? Like, even if you were able to sneak into the playoffs this year, what does that really mean about this team anyway? It means you were able to be, not the worst in the worst division of all time, essentially, right? Like, you would have just gotten curb stomped by the Avs in the first round. It would not have been a miracle playoff run. As much as everybody will say anything can happen once you get to the postseason, and normally I am one of those people that does firmly believe that this team wasn't going to go very far in the postseason, if anywhere at all. And again, what does it mean if you are just, an 85-point team that was able to make the playoffs? Right. Or
Right.
it's probably going to end up maybe even being less than that as the playoff cutoff. So it's 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 just one of those things where change needed to happen. And as the phrase has been thrown around a lot with this team, transformation needed to happen for this team.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I see a shift, at least from the language of ownership or from Lywicki talking about it after this news. And one thing that really stood out to me was talking about how they want to build a perennial playoff team, not just a team that sneaks into the playoffs. And Lywicki talked about, look, if we got into the playoffs, we're probably playing Colorado, and implied that that might not go so well for this team. And that's really the first time I've seen any of that kind of language really from ownership said, yeah, we want to have a perennial playoff team. They've said that part before, but saying that lucking into the last playoff spot and sneaking in is not good enough, I haven't heard that from them before. That feels like something that was not really allowed, because that is actual like expectation setting during the Ron Francis era. And that marks a little bit of a shift there in terms of language of expectations. For the first time ever, we're getting some real expectations that are not just show up and maybe try and sneak into the playoffs if you get super lucky.
Right, and we'll be getting more expectations in the form of some sort of roadmap come May. Not too many details on this, but one of the things Todd Lywicki did talk about during that press conference was that they understand that they need to be clear with the fan base, particularly their season ticket holders, about what the expectations are and what the processes the team is going through from a front office perspective are. Are they rebuilding? Are they retooling? Are they going for it? How are they making these decisions? What are those decisions? And kind of providing that roadmap to fans, and said that we should expect that sometime in May was the timeline given from him. And again, this is the first time that we would ever get anything public kind of clarifying just the position of the team from a front office perspective. And again, that's kind of wild to think about given we are 5 years into this team's existence. And we went through something like an expansion draft process where the team was a blank slate and could have decided then at that point they wanted to build slowly through the draft, or they wanted to try to give it a run like Vegas through the expansion draft or whatever. The fact that we never had one in the first place and then continued not to have one for 5 years, and only now potentially going into off season six that we can get one. Again, it's very, indicative of a lot of the problems that this fan base has had to endure during these last 5 years, as everybody's kind of tried to figure out exactly what this team is.
Right. And I think that's one of the biggest positives from all the news that has come out, is that, yeah, for the first time, the team's actually going to tell us what their plan is. And looking back at it, for Francis's entire tenure here, fans, media, I mean, we asked plenty of times what the plan was, and no coherent plan was ever communicated. And so thankfully, it looks like that'll change now. I mean, that's one of the best things to come out of all of this. The team's going to share an annual report with fans. And as Todd Lewicki said, we're going to set mile markers, and our fans are going to know where we are. So that sounds great. Again, we'll see what the actual plan and
Yeah.
everything looks like, but it at least gives us something to measure the team against, something to critique. And that is a much bigger step than what we had in the past. And really, I think is one of the larger failures of the Ron Francis era is just the fact that no plan was ever really communicated. We're left to wonder if one ever existed. And again, there are a lot of failures from Ron Francis, but I think that has to go near the top.
Yeah, all we knew was that there was a 3 to 5 year plan somewhere and it involved something. Right? But like that was the only thing that was ever communicated, and that was loosely communicated, I think, pre-expansion draft, and then never really talked about again after that. Was that there was like a 3 to 5 year plan, and it sounds like that was just kind of built around what the expectation was when they signed Ron Francis to be the person in charge of everything, of helping get this organization going in so many different facets. And then Todd Lewicki talked about this during his presser. Many people have talked about this, given the recent news and the fact that they are going to be parting ways with Ron Francis, just how involved he was in everything from designing the locker room to helping choose the logo and make adjustments there and everything like that. But yeah, it does seem like that was the most information we were ever given, and it was never even really anything, right? 3 to 5 year plan, cool. Every GM could say that they have a 3 to 5 year plan because they all should have a 3 to 5 year plan. It's about specifics and what does that plan actually entail? What is it that you're actually trying to do for the fans? That's where you need to have that communication, and it just never really existed with Ron Francis in charge.
No, and so hopefully that's something that's better going forward. And it seems like at least ownership and the people above have identified that was an issue, and hopefully that gets fixed. I personally I can't wait to see what the plan is in May. And so like again, we're not gonna in this episode we're not gonna talk about necessarily roster moves and what they should do going forward, because that's the a lot of those are best answered once you know what the general plan is. Like, are you taking a step back for a year? Are you going for it again next year? Doesn't do us a whole lot of good to talk about that until we know what the team's mindset is. But thankfully, we should know what it is in May.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have a lot to cover come May once that gets released. We'll also wait and record next week's podcast after we listen to and hear from Jason Botterill and get the opportunity to ask him some questions. That is currently scheduled for a week from today at the time of recording, so next Tuesday. So we'll have that next week, and we can kind of talk about his plans moving forward, because that is what is going to happen. Jason Botterill is going to stay as general manager. At least that has heavily been implied by Todd Lewicki. It sounds like both him and Lane Lambert's jobs are fairly secure, despite the fact that this independent outside audit is going to be taking place over the entirety of the hockey operations side of things. So multiple different things that we can then touch on and dive deeper into here. RJ, do you want to start with Jason Botterill staying on? Do you want to talk about the audit? Kind of which direction do you want to go here first?
I mean, I think the two of them are related. I think basically, I think we should kind of go over the what the team has basically decided to do about all of this. They've decided, of course, to part ways with Ron Francis, but beyond that, it seems like their plan is to keep Jason Botterill on as GM next season. As best we can tell, that's the plan. And then Todd Lewicki said that Botterill would lead a quote, fully independent audit of hockey operations. And I believe that was later clarified that like ownership would be the stakeholder in that audit. But basically, seems like Botterill's sticking around. Lane Lambert is sticking around. That was basically confirmed by Lewicki on a podcast. I mean, on the radio the next day. So they're keeping the coach, probably keeping the GM, and then this audit, this fully independent audit of hockey operations. They say it's going to involve an individual with fresh eyes on the organization, and that Botterill has identified some candidates to potentially lead that audit. But there was a little confusion there because it was like going to be a person and then a firm, and I'm not exactly sure what it'll look like, but I hopefully will get some more clarification on that when we talk to Bots on Tuesday.
Right, and then there was the confusion around bots leading the audit versus leading the search for who was going to do the audit, which it sounds like that is actually what it is. The language was initially said, as you kind of read the statement there from Lewicki, that Jason Botterill would be leading the audit, which then of course would not be like an independent audit if the general
Yeah.
manager is leading the audit of the hockey ops. That's not it. He then later clarified, Todd Lewicki, that he had misspoken earlier, and that it is that Jason Botterill is helping lead the search for who will be doing the audit. And I know that many fans still are like, well, then it's still, maybe not super totally independent or fresh or anything like that. Look, Jason Botterill has a long history in hockey. I think you want people that are going to be very familiar with how hockey ops departments are run throughout the league. When you have them do the audit, it does you no good to say have a traditional business firm come in and then look at your hockey operations when that is not their area of expertise. I think that what ownership is doing here is saying, look, we don't know these people in hockey. You do. Help us make the decision on who's going to come in and do this. And look, frankly, I understand that being the case, and it does make sense that that would be the case. I know, again, some people are saying that means it's not independent. I think the audit itself will be independent, but the search for who will be doing that audit, I understand why they would lean on somebody who spent their entire life in hockey versus themselves who do not have experience with these individuals.
Right, and that makes sense to me as well. I mean, and if you have chosen Bottrell to be the guy leading things in the organization going forward, which you basically have, then yeah, you have to lean on him for this. And so I do think the audit is as independent as it's going to be.
Mhm.
But also, if you're looking on the other side of it, look, people know this from the business world. Often external consultants are brought in largely to just kind of say what the higher ups want them to say anyway. That is a very common thing that
Mhm.
happens. Not saying it's going to happen here, but it has happened plenty in the past in plenty of situations and businesses everywhere. So, we'll see what this actually is.
Right, and I'm curious as to what it could be that they're potentially even looking for, right? Like, is
Mhm.
it just a PR stunt to say that you're doing this audit, or is it that you are actively looking for something? And I think that based on how this team has performed, RJ, the fact that they have had three different coaches and continue to perform as poor as they are, I do think that there is a genuine desire on behalf of ownership for them to really understand why the team is not better, given they felt like they hired Ron Francis, somebody who had an incredible career in his own right, who was an executive previously, and who had a very highly thought of reputation. And things are just really not working out in this investment that they made, both in Ron Francis and with the team in general. And I do think that for them, the audit, like I believe Todd Lywicki when they're like, we do want to kind of find out what's going wrong here. Like I do believe that that is the case. I don't think that the audit is going to be for say some of the things that Todd Lywicki mentioned, in the sense of, he talked about everything from meals and medical and facilities and all of that kind of stuff. The facilities are all brand new. We know that that shouldn't be an issue, right? Like travel probably isn't an issue. I mean, you can look at stuff like that. You can look at medical, you can look at meal prep, but I'm guessing that the players are pretty well taken care of. I know Ian Furness, the Kraken Hockey Network, went on a radio interview up in Vancouver and kind of said the same thing of all of these things are kind of top notch. So that's not really what you'd be looking at in a situation like this. I think a lot of this has to do with them coming in and seeing, okay, this player group, this core group of players that Ron Francis very much committed to and that we have been committed to for the last 5 years. What is it about them that's just not working? So that then moving forward, we can make changes to it and get better essentially.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think also, when you look at the state that Ron Francis has kind of left everything as he steps out the door, even aside from the group of players, I think there's a lot of rot in the organization. There's a lot of dysfunction in the organization, and we've seen hints of it certainly that have come out, whether it's the controversy over like Dan Bilesma, was that really the GM's decision, who there were stakeholders on both sides that maybe fought for him or somebody else. We've seen whether it was Lywicki kind of alluding to it in the presser this year about maybe Bottrell didn't have full autonomy over
Oh,
the
I've got
past
lots
year.
on
And
that. Yeah.
we have lots of that. I'm trying not to get too far into that, but my point is, clearly been some issues beyond that as well about has there been a single decision maker, has there been internal fighting? That's another thing to look at, where how did that situation How was that allowed to exist for as long as it was? And what can we do about it?
Right, because the overwhelming sense I get from this situation, from hearing everybody talk about it publicly and hearing everybody talk about things in the past, the various people that we've communicated with within the organization, I think a lot of it would a lot of Kraken fans would be surprised by how many things went through Ron Francis, right? How involved in things he really was from on a day-to-day level involving this team. And, again, like so much about it was talked about with Lywicki's presser about how involved he was with setting up the organization and everything. Kind of gives you an idea if the guy was in charge of designing locker room and helping design the logo and do all of that kind of stuff, right? This was a person that they very much believed in, they very much trusted in, and they gave a lot of internal power to on not just the hockey ops side, but everywhere with the organization. And so I think that yes, I'm with you. The audit is going to look at that stuff, but I also think a lot of that stuff is just going to be handled by the fact that he is no longer going to be there anymore, right? Like a lot of if that is in fact the problem, and that is where the majority of the dysfunction was coming from, and I think that that's probably half the case. That problem goes away anyway, right? Like it's not as huge of a priority to try to deal with because you just don't have him there. Now, what you would have to then do is ensure that you don't kind of give anybody else that level of seniority, power to make those decisions and be seen as the guy everyone has to come to. And that's kind of the sense I get as we listen to Lywicki and what he kind of alluded to when it comes to the split this past year between Jason Botterill and Ron Francis. And you hear it in, Ian's interview, from other people's interviews as they've been going out and talking about what the situation was this past year. Everybody has to say the party line that was Jason was in charge of the roster and that he did not have Ron Francis interfering with his roster decisions. But then everybody then starts talking about situations that allude to the fact that Ron Francis was still heavily involved in really everything. And so I do think that that is something that the team kind of recognized here. And I think that that's a big reason why Jason Botterill is staying in the position of general manager and we're not seeing a true cleaning of house. I think during this last year, people were still going to Ron Francis about everything. That was still the pipeline. And Jason Botterill had some autonomy when it comes to physically making the decisions of what's going to happen on the roster, but there's so many more things involved in running a hockey team that I think was still all being channeled through Ron Francis's office, and that at the end of the day is what they're trying to figure out is how do you split that? Because I think ultimately, RJ, my biggest takeaway from the Lywicki presser and everything that's happening is that Todd Lywicki knows sports, this ownership group knows sports, but they don't know hockey. And that they brought in Ron Francis to be the guy who knows hockey and to set everything up for them. And Ron Francis set it up in a way that we can just definitively say did not work. It gave him probably a little bit too much control, just in the sense that any one person shouldn't have that much control. And that was the mistake of ownership, was to bring in and trust everything to one individual. I think that that's the big takeaway here.
Well, and here's the thing, I don't even mind necessarily the decision to entrust everything to one individual, because that's ideally what I'd like to see ownership do in most cases. Is you entrust one individual to run everything in the organization, and their word kind of goes, but you have to entrust the right person. And every bit as importantly, you have to know and be able to recognize when you have not entrusted the right person and be able to make that change. I mean, maybe you
I
disagree with
mean,
me here. Like, I want to give you, yeah.
yeah, I certainly think that on like say uh s- specific aspects of hockey ops, right? Like I do think like
Oh,
general
for hockey ops.
managers
Yeah, that's a
should
good
be
point. Yes,
able
yes,
to,
yes.
but we're talking about somebody who was also involved on business decisions, PR decisions. I mean, this is a person who was involved in every aspect of the organization that they were entrusting. That I think is the problem. I think yes, when you hire a GM,
Yeah, I see what
you
you mean.
should be hands off with that GM or with that president of hockey ops. But Ron Francis was a lot more than just that, even though that's what his job title was.
No, definitely. And yeah, I see your point now. No, I completely agree with that. And because hockey ops is such a big job anyway, if you're handling just the hockey ops side, that is a full-time job. That is a lot to do. And so, I mean, that's one of the things too that kind of bugs me when you talk about Francis, and especially as he's leaving now and people are talking about, okay, well, so much talk about the non-hockey ops side. You know, he helped with branding, he designed the facilities, and I don't know. I kind of take issue with some of that. I'm sure he did, but one, was that should he have been doing that? Two, it also, I feel like, minimizes the great work done by so many other people who
Mhm.
also worked on that sort of thing. I think that they're the ones who should really get the credit for the successes there. Also, I think that probably, you know, when you're building a franchise, you know, that probably would have been done to some extent, or at least helped with by whoever you would have brought in. And also, his job was just to build the roster. That's like your job as the GM. That's the number one thing
Yeah.
that you should be judged on ultimately. And he failed at that. And you know, none of the other stuff matters if you don't do a good job of what your actual primary job is. So that's a bit of an aside, but I do think that, you know, is an issue with ownership of why that was allowed to happen. And then crucially too, over the past year, where you promote Ron Francis, you promote Jason Botterill, and you still have him in the Francis in the organization, basically looking over again. You know, it'd be debated, but it felt like maybe looking over Bottrell's shoulder here. And even if he's not wielding influence on specific roster moves, having that guy who built everything and controls everything, who's all powerful until a year ago, still there, probably is going to play into some of the decisions you make. You can't get away from it, even if he's not telling you what specifically to do. It's a bad situation. And I said a year ago that it would be a bad situation. It's like,
Mhm.
who could have predicted this? A lot of people did, myself included. And it looks like it turned out to be every bit as bad as we thought it might be.
Especially because essentially everybody within the organization were Ron Francis hires. So you're also kind of setting up Jason Bottrill or whoever was going to be then GM to again be in this difficult spot of, you know, how many of those people who have for the past 4 years been going to Ron Francis and Ron Francis is still there, and they were people that Ron Francis hired and brought in, right? Like how often do you change up that habit of going to Ron Francis to go to Jason Bottrill, right? I understand that it would create a negative workflow problem within the organization that would just be difficult to handle. And I also want to say, like, and I won't speak for you, but certainly on my side of things, I still think the idea of having a separate president of hockey ops role and a general manager, having those be two separate roles that two different individuals occupy, is a completely viable strategy. The idea of having two people occupy those two different jobs was not the problem here in Seattle. It was the fact that of how you did it and promoting people up when you had somebody like Ron Francis who was so influential and involved in everything that then it creates that issue. Plenty of other teams operate without that kind of or seeming level of dysfunction by having people in those two roles and not having it be one person. And more teams are transitioning to that look for their front office. The key thing, though, is you need those two individuals to really be on the same page, and you need there to be a very clear delineation of powers and who's going to be reporting to who and what issues go to which individual for them to deal with. And it feels like that is where everything kind of went wrong with this situation, is that that aspect of it was not made clear, and that then does mean that this setup is worse than say just having one person be the person in charge.
It's a lot more complicated to make work properly. And clearly that wasn't the case here. You know, and the we were told last summer that the reason they were doing that is that, look, there's just too much work for the GM job to do. It's basically two people's worth of work. We need to split this up. You know, and this has always been the plan. And we're gonna just make it so it's a better, divvying up of the job and everything. I think we can see now that was complete BS.
Right.
That was a way. And I think this is where, again, there needs to be some accountability here. But the decision, I think, was probably made because, and as we now know, Ron Francis had 1 year left on his contract. They felt like they couldn't get rid of him short of that contract, like they might have owed him that last year. And so they kind of made up this position and these changes. And it didn't work, and it was every bit as bad as people could have predicted. Like, this wasn't a case of there just being too much work for one person to do or whatever. This was, I don't know, this was just some kind of maneuver to make sure that Ron Francis could stay in the org for one more year. And I mean, there needs to be some accountability there, like,
Well,
for that decision.
right, and it brings up the idea too of, does this mean that they are going to be hiring another president of hockey ops? Because if your whole thing is that this is too much for one person, even the great Ron Francis, right? Then how can you just have Jason Botterill stay on and then you don't replace Ron Francis and you don't replace the position that you have created of president of hockey ops?
Well, I believe the answer is no. I mean, Todd Lewicki said we're going to go back to the model we started with. We're going to go to have a GM that makes decisions. I don't think certainly doesn't sound like they're going to
Right.
replace Ron Francis in that position, which again tells you that what we were told over the summer is BS.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like it put them in this position where yes, it means that everything they told us last year was not entirely truthful, we'll say.
Yeah. And so that's something that, again, at a certain point in this podcast, we're going to have to kind of turn the page into, what this means. It was this enough, and the decisions and everything. But I think that's worth bearing in mind that, when ownership, when Todd Lewicki, when they're trying to sell you on this path going forward, remember what they told you a year ago and how true that ended up being.
Exactly. Um, Before we get into that and things kind of moving forward, we can probably and the other things that were talked about at the Liwiki presser, because there's definitely some more stuff that I want to talk about
Mhm.
in there. We can kind of maybe close up on Ron Francis and everything there, and I know a lot of the discussion, not just people here in the Seattle media scene, but also on the national front, as people were, reacting to this news, pretty universally. I mean, everybody comes to the same conclusion when it comes to Ron Francis as the head of a front office, as somebody running a team. And that is just at the end of the day, as you and I have said so many times, RJ, he's just not bold enough, which is the word that Jeff Merrick ended up using, and I think really applies the best here. I know him and Greg Wyshynski talked a lot about what his time in Carolina was like. He was there within the organization, not necessarily in the GM spot, but he was within the organization for 8 years, 8 playoff-less years, and kind of the team when he left. Similar spot to where the Kraken are, where they're like a playoff bubble-ish team, and that's kind of all they are. You know, the one thing that I keep coming back to, RJ, is we saw his first ever $6 million contract, AAV deal, right? Like Ron Francis, when he was hired, and through the first couple years of the Kraken's existence, had never given somebody a contract over $6 million a year, right? A $6 million cap hit. And the idea that I know a lot gets talked about of as far as him maybe not being bold enough to make certain trades and to utilize certain assets in that way. For me, the clearest red flag that this person is not willing to do what it takes to build a strong contending team and to get the star players that you need in order to do that is the fact that he had to be dragged across the $6 million line in a day and age where at that time in the NHL there were players making more than double $6 million. That to me is, I still think, the biggest thing that I as I was reflecting on everything, going back to and being like, that was a huge neon sign red flag that everybody should have seen, including Kraken ownership, that maybe this guy wasn't going to do enough to get this team to true contention.
Yeah, and especially given that you are an expansion team and you had the expansion draft process to play with, that you had that blank slate, that you had all of the cap space you could possibly have in a flat cap environment where cap space was a weapon. You needed, probably more than any other time, any other team, somebody who could wheel and deal, who could maximize assets, who was not going to just try and build a team up conservatively through the draft the traditional way. This is the last setup that you wanted for somebody with Ron Francis's style as a GM, which, by the way, I don't think would work anywhere,
Mhm.
but certainly not in this scenario. And especially after seeing the success that Vegas had, where they were the anti Ron Francis, the way that team was run. They wheeled and dealed, they gave out big money, they weren't afraid of taking big risks. And Ron Francis was every bit as conservative as the Golden Knights were aggressive. And wouldn't you know, the results turned out the opposite of what they did for Vegas. Um, and so that's ultimately, I think, yeah, the biggest failure there. And then when he finally was pressed into giving out those bigger contracts, by the pressure, I think, of maybe, I guess we know his job really wasn't on the line, but clearly there was some maybe talk that he needed to do something a couple of years ago. Goes and signs Chandler Stevenson to that big deal, signs Brandon Montour to that big deal. Doesn't even do the aggressive part particularly well, even when he's pressed into it. So look, I think I haven't been shy about my criticism of Ron Francis. And, I hate to speak this way about somebody losing their job, but look, he's going to be okay. Nobody's entitled to an NHL GM job. He's a Hall of Famer. He's always going to be a legend as a player. He's always going to be able to find employment somewhere. But I do think he's going to go down as one of the worst GMs in NHL history, and not the worst. I know Mike Milbury exists. I saw what he did to the Islanders, of course, but no playoffs in that long tenure in Carolina, and then again inheriting a blank slate in Seattle, turning it into a bottom five team with no current or future stars. That is a record of failure that few NHL GMs can match. And so I think that's ultimately going to be the legacy here, is just the damage that he did to this franchise.
Right. And being in a situation now where you're talking about a core group of players that were really established during that expansion draft that this team is still trying to rely on, despite the fact that they have kind of proven time and time again that they were not enough on their own to be a perennial playoff team, to be a team that was going to be able to do what they could do. And it's just, or what the team wanted them to do, what fans wanted to do. That I think is just something that, ultimately is why the team is in this spot, is because they just never truly moved forward from where they were from day one, as far as what the roster was. Like, it is shocking when you look at this roster how many guys are still around 5 full seasons after the expansion draft.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the Vegas expansion draft taught us is that you need to view everything you get there not so much as a roster, but as a collection of assets that you work with and you wheel and deal to try and get the roster that you want. And I think from day one, he always kind of viewed it as trying to build a roster. And we see the evidence of that and the fact that so many of them are still around. It's just not how you approach that sort of thing. And again, it's one thing to do that for a year or two after the expansion draft.
Yep.
It takes time to make these moves, but over and over again, when you had the opportunities to make some changes, to move on from some of these players, you re-signed Jordan Eberle twice, there's a lot of guys you continued to bring back, and that continued to be an issue there. And it's kind of a fitting parallel with the players kind of sticking around from the expansion draft to Francis not really going away quietly, even when he's not the GM anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So, anything else on the Ron Francis front that you want to talk about before we move on?
I think there's not a whole lot more I can say that I haven't already said about him at some point.
Yeah, you've been pretty clear. You've made
I haven't held much back.
made your thoughts known on everything there. All right, so the Kraken do decide. Again, we'll see what the audit of the hockey ops says, and finds from this team. I do think that, assuming that the person or firm, whoever is going to be doing said audit, is going to, find things, it seems pretty clear to me that yes, the roster just not being good enough is going to be one of the things that is going to have to be there. I think fans, more so than ever before, with Ron Francis gone, are going to have to harden themselves up to the idea that players that you know and love are going to be gone. They're going to have to be traded or moved or not re-signed, in some capacity. I think that is, as we just talked about, been one of the biggest problems with this team. I know other people share that opinion. Again, it was something Ian Furness talked about in his interview, that this fan base particularly has a great love of depth role players and hates to see them go, but you have to kind of let them go if you want the team to be better and you want to have a better roster than just role players. And I know he highlighted like Freddie Gaudreau and him playing on the second line at times this year and stuff. And again, Freddie Gaudreau, great person, great hockey player. He shouldn't be used in the way that he's having to be used on this roster, right? It just doesn't really work there. So that's the big thing I think moving forward that the audit is going to find is that angle of things, and then restructuring, yes, the reporting process, who's reporting to who on the high end side of everything.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, I think like Ian Furness put it well. Do you want to have these same players, or do you want to win?
Right.
And I think also too, like I understand the attachment to players from some of the fans. Totally get that. I mean, that's anyone who was a hockey fan growing up at any time, right? You have players you like and get attached to. But I think that happens, even if they bring in new players, then okay, you form new attachments to those players, and especially if they win, that's what really creates those bonds,
Right.
is having those great teams that you get to see play. So I think that's just something that I feel like a lot of fans are, you know, certainly after these last 3 seasons have maybe warmed up to it more than they otherwise would have. I think a lot of people are probably on board with some of those changes that are coming.
I agree. Um, I mean, on the audit front, again, Todd Lewicki, he said that they're going to be looking at lots of things. Did mention that they need to do a better job when it comes to getting players to want to play in Seattle, and I think that that was both on the front of, when talking and communicating with free agents and potentially trade targets, but also when it came to retaining players as well, and said that they were going to be reviewing everything like the food, the facilities, all of that kind of stuff. Again, I don't think that those are the issues. I think that there has to be some sort of larger issue, RJ, than just, oh, these brand new facilities aren't good enough.
Yeah, I don't think it's the facilities. But I do think, thankfully, for the first time, there's really been kind of an admission that the team needs to do more to attract players and to keep players. And I think that's something that probably they ran into a lot this season. Again, we don't know what happened, behind the scenes, like say with the Artemi Panarin thing, but reportedly they were interested. Reportedly he didn't want to come to Seattle. That might not have been something they could do anything about. But at the end of the day, if you're going to fix the roster issues, chances are you're going to need to convince a player to come here. I know with the trade, you don't always have to, but a lot of the best players in the NHL have significant trade protection, and they are not going to want to go to an organization that, as we're seeing, was, I think, pretty dysfunctional under Ron Francis. And the facilities may be top notch. Everything might be brand new. As Ian Furness, I think he used the term country club. It might be
Hmm.
like a country club, coming into to play here. But at the end of the day, if you look at it and see that the organization, feels like they don't really know what they're doing, or they can't run things properly, or build a team that is going to win, a lot of players just want to win. And you have to be able to show that in order to attract players. So it might be something as simple as that. I don't know how much the audit could even tell you about that, aside from just, get your house in order.
Right.
That's the first thing, because players, they've been in this long enough. They can smell a dysfunctional organization from miles away. They know, and players talk too.
Hmm.
They know how teams are. They know which teams know what they're doing and which teams don't. You just have to get your own house in order. I think the other things that are against you, the weather during the hockey season isn't as good as maybe say in California or Vegas for a lot of these players. Can't do anything about that. Property values, it's more expensive to buy a house here. You can't really do anything about that. The new income tax that's going to affect a lot of these players, you can't really do anything about that. But the things you can do something about it might just be as simple as, like, just again fix things, like in a general sense.
Right, and do the things that do matter to these players, right? Like we talked a lot about it. Again, the CBA is going to change it, and the potential tax is going to change things as well if that goes through and gets held up. But never utilizing the bonus structure when it existed as a state with no state income tax at the time, right? Like when you had other organizations absolutely utilizing that, and then you are by far and away the one organization that doesn't. And not only do you not take advantage of it just in the sense of you're not like really pushing it to its absolute limits the way Florida was, where you're essentially giving like bare, minimum level salary and everything is signing bonus to these guys in order for them to dodge a big tax bill. You're actively, when you're Ron Francis, like again, we talk about the $6 million threshold. Ryan Francis had to be dragged into giving a signing bonus period. Like the amount of signing bonuses on this roster is shockingly small. And I don't mean like monetary and percentage of the contract as signing bonus. I mean number of contracts that have a signing bonus. Like it was essentially only given to certain guys that were brought in and only for a year or two so that they could like afford to buy a house in Seattle and move there. Right? Like the Chandler Stevenson contract had signing bonus in the first 2 years, and that's it. And not a huge percentage of it. And most of the other contracts given out, no signing bonus. None. Like that's
And that just
insane
makes
to
so
me.
little sense to be the thing to be stingy about. Sorry, I'm getting back into my Francis criticism here, but as the thing to be stingy about, when you have a good ownership group that does not mind shelling out the money. I asked Jason Botterill about this, and he said that it's not restrictions from ownership. We're welcome to do that as much as we want if we feel it's the thing we want to do. It just never came up, and that tells me there's limited imagination there, but also to be so stingy with that when you're certainly not stingy about trade protection. It's one of those things like, look, we don't give bonus money, we don't give trade protection. That's just kind of how we run things. Not really the case. I mean, the Kraken at one point in Francis's tenure had the most play contracts with trade protection in the entire NHL. Like, you're not exactly worried about giving stuff like that out. Why would you not go for the bonus money to try and bring down AAV?
Right. And again, it shouldn't have been an issue with ownership not giving you the resources to do that, given everybody keeps saying that ownership has no issue on the money side of things. And I certainly believe that. And anybody looking at the
I do
potential
too.
dollar figure that they're going to be spending on an NBA bidding, process, should understand that I really don't think that that was the issue here. It was just the people doing the negotiating for these contracts were not negotiating using that as a weapon at their disposal, a tool in their toolbox, and that is a problem. I mean, I'm going through and I'm looking at so many of these. The Adam Larson extension, only signing bonus in the first year. The Vince Dunn extension, zero signing bonus. It's just all base salary. Like this just isn't how the league operates anymore, and I think that that was a huge problem for this front office was trying to compete in essentially the modern world with strategies and tactics that are 10 to 15 years out of date. Like that's essentially what we're talking about here is other teams are staying hip and up on the trends that players want. And I'm not talking about lifestyle things here. I'm talking about just the basics of how their contracts get structured. You're just not competitive on that most basic fundamental level when it comes to dealing with players. Yeah, it's no surprise that maybe guys don't have you at the top of their list to come and check out and maybe join your team. I don't know. It's just a thought, just an idea.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's just over the years, and especially now is being revealed to us again, it's just how bad the rot was and how bad of a state things were done in this organization under Ron Francis, and again how big of a scope this audit should really have to cover. Like, I wonder if it, because they say it's going to be quick. I don't know what that means, but I imagine it's not going to take a month, right, for this audit. Probably not. I mean, not months, multiple months.
I mean, I don't know if it was outright said or maybe just kind of implied, but they wouldn't be releasing the annual report that they said was coming in May until after the audit took place. So,
Yeah, that gives a firm end timeline, and then you still
yeah.
need to work on the report and everything. So it can't take that long. I mean, there's going to be so much stuff. Like, how much can you even find in that time versus just given how much we kind of know the problems that are out there?
Yeah,
Fair question.
right. Well, again, if you know you only have to look at two or three areas, say facilities are fine. That's not going to be the issue.
Yeah.
Whatever is going to be fine. Then that's you can kind of go from there and do things. God, I just keep looking at these contracts. Jared McCann's contract, not a single penny in signing bonus. it's just weird to me. I don't understand it.
That one, I don't know how much you were going to bring down the AAV
Yeah,
any
not a
further than it
ton,
was. That
but
one's a steal, but
yeah, but still. So yeah, that was the other big thing that it's just like I think that there's lots of things the way that the Kraken were doing business under Ron Francis that just did not translate anymore to today's day and age. The other big thing on the hockey ops side for me, and again, I don't know how much the audit is going to tell about this, but it goes back to what we were talking about as far as sticking with this core group of players as we, maybe don't take a step away from the front office for a moment. I really think that there is just something fundamentally wrong in the locker room at this point that kind of leads to this team falling apart and essentially quitting and having consistent effort issues and all of those things. Like at this point, after everything that happened here, I don't, and the fact that you have had three coaches, so it can't be coaching. I don't know how the team doesn't have to look really long and hard and say that there isn't a problem in that locker room, because there clearly has to be for this group to continually fall apart the way that they do, and for effort and consistency to constantly be a problem for them, to have multiple coaches have to have press conferences with us after games saying, I don't know why they're making the same mistake when I've talked to you about this now for a week and a half, right? And presumably they've talked to the players about it for that week and a half, right? The fact that we're on our third coach who has to come out and say after games that it's mind boggling that his team is playing a certain way. At some point, ownership, at the executive level, they have to understand that there is an issue within this locker room, and I would hope that whatever audit they go through and whatever Jason Botterill is going to do, assuming he stays in charge, is going to really look at that and try to fix that, because ultimately you can add in another player or two and swap and move some pieces around, but if your core leadership group has an issue and that locker room is just a bad place to be, or it's a complacent place to be, which is just as bad when it comes to professional sports, it's not going to change anything.
no, it's not. And that's something that I don't know how much like the independent audit is going to cover that, but it's certainly something that as Bottrill as the GM is going to need to go through and be like, okay, which players are the problem here, and do what you can to get them out of that room. And that it's tough to do because you can't just overhaul an entire roster in one off season. You've got guys locked into contracts. I mean, the first place to look, I would say, would even be the captain. And
Hmm.
again, Jordan Eberle played out of his mind this season,
Yep.
like did everything on the ice you could ask. I'm not directing criticism there, but when this happens year after year, and Ebbs has been the captain, he's been in that room the whole time. You have to look at that. But this, at the trade deadline, you just decide to extend him for 2 years. He's got full trade protection. Like you can't move him. And also again, it makes it so hard. I won't get ahead of myself, but like, where's the accountability for that to say, like, who even made it? That's, yeah,
Right.
that's later on what we're talking about, but still, like, you have to look at the roster and decide, who has to stay and who has to go. And you may not have the option you may see someone like, okay, that guy might be a problem, but we can't get rid of him. He's got trade protection. Like, how do you handle that? So that's just something they're going to have to go through and fix, because that is one of the larger things. Like, yes, the team doesn't have enough talent, but the effort issues are absolutely there. The locker room seems like it's not a good place to be, and there needs to be larger changes there.
Yeah. So that would be one of the things that, yes, whoever it is gonna have to seriously deal with when it comes to that. Looking at other things, RJ here. I mean, feel free to jump in if there's something that really want to get
Mhm.
out there. But Jerry Bruckheimer was brought up as somebody that they're going to be bringing in as well, already part of the ownership group, but going to be bringing in to have more of a say and be more of a presence, or at least as far as the offseason goes with setting things up. I know some people were questioning that. I have to assume that's just going to be on the business side of things, not on the hockey ops side of things. I know that wasn't specifically said, but I don't think it kind of needed to be. But then there was plenty of reaction to it. So I think that's definitely going to be on the business side of things, and probably also the TV side of things, because Kraken Hockey Network is in its second year of existing. It's finishing up its second year of broadcasting these games, and we don't obviously know what their ratings are, but we know the general vibe from really everybody on the media scene, whether it's us on the independent side or the people on the team side. And my guess is that there's room for growth there, and that they understand that. And who better to bring in than one of the most successful producers of all time, and somebody who has runs a massive operation when it comes to all of his production studios and everything like that. So just wanted to say, I know, because anytime an owner is like named like that and coming in, people get worried about owners coming in and putting their hands on everything in sports, like you kind of mentioned earlier. I really don't think Jerry Bruckheimer is going to be helping make roster decisions. I think this is on the TV and business side of things.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, Bruckheimer's not going to be trying to figure out how to increase scoring on the wing here. This is not that situation. I think we can all calm down about that. And yeah, I mean, on the TV side, if you have someone like that at your disposal, why wouldn't you utilize him if he's willing to do it? So that's fine. I have no issue with that.
Yeah. Um, what I mean, there's still, it feels like a lot, RJ. I mean, what has really been sticking with you that you want to get out there? I know I've kind of driven a lot of this conversation.
No, it's all good. I mean, I don't know whether it's time to get to it now, but the last big thing I have was just, is this enough? And
Mhm.
is this the right decision to make? Because I had notes written for what was supposed to be this deep dive before the Francis news, and I had to scrap a lot of them because a lot of them were obsolete. But one of the things I was looking at was, okay, what are your options? Where do you go from here? Do you get rid of Francis and keep Botterill and Lambert? Do you, do more of a clean house? Like, what do you do? And I was going to kind of weigh the merits of each of them. Of course, that doesn't work because they've already made a decision, but I certainly have strong feelings about whether or not it was the right decision. But again, I don't want to get to that before we're ready if we want to still
No,
go over the smaller things here.
I think we're good to get to that, and we're 55 minutes in, so it's
Okay,
probably
that's yeah, all
appropriate.
right, fair. Okay, because then I'll start on this because I think that's another thing that a lot of people are wondering and would want our opinions on is just, well, is this the right move? I support getting rid of Ron Francis. That should have happened years ago. But has the team gone far enough? And I don't think they have. This is a big missed opportunity for the Kraken in my mind. This was an opportunity to completely clean house after 5 years of pretty complete failure that we've detailed over the last 55 minutes, the poor state that this organization is in. Now, on the good side, they did finally admit to some of that failure.
Mhm.
And we see that excuse me, in things like Todd Lewicki talking about how they don't want a team that's just going to crawl into the playoffs. They want to be better on the ice. They need to do more to attract players and to keep players, and admitting some of the things that have gone wrong with this team, even saying, and I think in pretty strong terms, we have not delivered on the promise of this team. No one is satisfied. And my problem with this is that the team's actions and deciding what to do about it do not match those words. This was a chance to clean house, but they refused to make the hard decisions to bring real change. Despite heavily implying or even saying that real change was needed, I don't think they've gone far enough to make real change. And I think it stems from the decision last year, the bad decision, which I think just about everyone would admit was a bad decision, to promote Ron Francis to president of hockey ops and promote Jason Botterill to GM. That was a bad decision. And I'm left with the question of, okay, where's the accountability for that decision? That's my issue. And look, I know you can't fire ownership. I get that. But if given that you made such a disastrous decision there, and that things are so deeply wrong with the organization, as you're now admitting, maybe, just maybe entertain the idea that one of the things that should be, say, under the scope of this audit that's about to happen should be the question of whether to retain the GM or not. I don't know why you would trust yourself to go ahead and make that decision already, pre-audit, that we are going to stick with the existing GM and we're not going to clean house. It's one thing if you decide, okay, we're going to clean house, we're going to kind of look at this thing completely fresh and anew. I get that. But this feels to me like another half measure that is being caused by being, I guess, boxed in from last year's bad decision to promote Francis and Botterill, because it's not fair to fire a new GM after 1 year, and especially as it sounds like 1 year where he didn't really even have full autonomy. Like it's not fair. But I look at it and I think, if the front office is still made up of people who have been here from day one, how can we believe that anything is going to change? And so my question to ownership is, they're trying to sell me, trying to sell the fans on what I believe is yet another half measure. Why should the fans believe you? And what about this team's track record of decision making should make fans believe that you don't need to clean house? That this Kraken ownership, by the way, same group that assured us a year ago that the team was on the right track, assured us that Jason Botterill would be autonomous, assured us that this team was really close. They were right there. They could be competitive. When they tell us now that Jason Botterill is the right man to lead hockey ops going forward, what reason do we have to believe that they're correct in that judgment? Certainly before any audit has happened. And what reason do we have to believe that somebody picked by this group in 2021, by the way, that's when they
Mhm.
brought Botterill on board, when they had all the confidence in the world in Ron Francis, who was, at the time, you know, and he's been here the entire time, whether he had power or not. Why should we believe that he has, like, I guess, the best claim to be the right person to lead hockey ops, rather than somebody from outside the organization who is not tied to all the decisions that have led the team to this point? I'm just not, I'm not convinced this is enough, and I'm not convinced that things are going to change for real. I think ownership has a real desire to change things. I think,
Mhm.
again, Todd Lewicki, he's got a lot of success in the
Yep.
sports world. I've got a lot of respect for him. I'm sure he wants to turn things around, and I'm sure he sees that this is not good enough. And you can tell that in what he says. But I just don't see the actions matching that. How can you say that the team has not lived up to the promise of the organization and detail all the things that have gone wrong here and not think that you need to clean house? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And so I don't think the organization has gone far enough here.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Like the only way I can think that it's okay is that, they have access to information we do not, and that, internally, maybe when there were key decisions that needed to be made along the way that ultimately obviously did not work out for the team, Bottrell was arguing against them. Right? Like that's the only thing that I can think of that would make them think that, yeah, we should give him this opportunity and just kind of transfer the power of the position over to him and entrust him for at least another year and another key year too, because we haven't brought up the Sonics angle and the fact that the team and everybody knows this team needs to be in some sort of good shape by the time the Sonics get back, because otherwise it is just going to fade into irrelevance in the Seattle sports scene. Like already it's going to be tough for them, as it is for every NHL team in every market that has competition in the other big four sports, right? And even more and more so the big five sports if you count MLS here, right? It's going to be a huge issue for them. And for me, it's not even just the fact that this is somebody who was around from the beginning, and so it's not a true cleaning of house and it's not a true reset on the decision makers and what's going to be happening. And again, we'll see post audit, who stays and who goes around Jason Botterill, because maybe that makes a big difference if the assistant GMs are gone and he brings in new people and scouting staff and things like that are all changed. Maybe then that's enough. And that's what ownership is thinking, is that, like, look, everybody were Ron Francis hires. If we let Jason hire his own people, then it is essentially a different organization. And I think to an extent that is true, but we haven't seen that yet. And so, like, that's me trying to give them the benefit of the doubt on something that they have given me no reason to actually do that for. But I think ultimately for me, the thing that is going to be the key aspect of this offseason, more so than their decision to keep Jason Botterill versus bringing in somebody from the outside and going with the clean house, is, does ownership get on board with the idea of this team needing to do what it needs to do, which is, at the very least, as we talked about last night on post game, a 1 year step back retool, right? This team needs to be rebuilt in some way, shape, or form. It is not good enough the way it is, and you cannot piecemeal anything around it to make it as good as it needs to be. You have to, at some point, really start over at the foundation. And that to me is the real thing with ownership. I think whether it's Jason Botterill and somebody who's been around as long as he has within this organization, or somebody from the outside, if ownership's not willing to get on board with that, it won't matter, because they could have cleaned house and brought in anyone in the front office position. If the mandate to that person in that new front office was, you need to stay competitive and we are in win now mode, it won't really have fundamentally changed that much, because they're still going to be going down the wrong path. It will just be a different person driving the car. And I think that that's the big thing for me is if keeping Jason Botterill for another year or two means that they feel comfortable and confident in his ability to take a step back, rebuild. Let's use our high draft pick this year that we're going to have. Let's try to get another high draft pick, and we'll build around those young core foundational pieces. I don't care that it's Jason Botterill. But if the decision is we need to go for it, and Jason Botterill is put in the position where he has to make decisions to go for it now, I essentially don't care that it's Jason Botterill, because to me the fundamental problems is ownership willing to do the steps necessary and take the steps necessary. I think that that ultimately becomes the bigger question, versus just who's going to be making those decisions. Like the big decision has already been made.
Right. I think that is a fair point, and that's really where I start to worry about ownership. Certainly, if the
Yes.
plan comes out in May and it's like we're trying to be a playoff team next year, that would show that there's still the same level of short-sightedness and delusion that has plagued this organization for the last 3 years about, evaluating whether the team actually is. And it's the kind of thing that, yeah, would mess up anybody's attempt to better the roster in the way that it needs to happen. And it's so frustrating to me because they did this again in over the last year. They misevaluated the team. They went into go for it mode, and it blew up on in everybody's face. And I can't tell whose fault it is. I don't know who to hold accountable for that. I don't know whether it was a mandate from ownership. I don't know whether it was Ron Francis pulling the strings. I don't know whether it was Jason Botterill, who was actually autonomous and made the decision. Yeah, no, this roster is good enough. Let's go for it. There is nobody clearly who can be held accountable for that. Whereas if they clean house, then yeah, everyone's held accountable, all of that. It's really frustrating for me to try and evaluate this, because ultimately you're right. That is the big decision of, do you try and cut corners and go for it to try and stay competitive, or do you take a step back? Which, by the way, if they had done that 2 years ago, instead of signing Montour and Stevenson and taking a step back that year, and by now they'd be fine.
Hmm.
They'd be ready in go for it mode. The prospects probably would have developed better. They would have had higher draft picks. They would be in a great spot right now. Even last year, if they had decided to do that and,
Yep.
and have this be a proper transition year, maybe you don't lose Shane Wright's, development completely. Maybe Yanni Newman, it could be a 20 goal scorer for you, and you have that to build off of. And you probably have better lottery odds than you do right now. And you've got a real shot at Gavin McKenna or Ivar Stenberg. You're in a better position now, and you're faster along in that. But and the other thing too is, this, we're getting too much into the roster stuff, but like also making that decision this year and last year, but to launch a hopeless quest for the playoffs, you've also ensured that the vibe around this team and its reputation are so bad because you've fallen so short of the expectations that no star player with any say is going to choose to come here. That's the other thing. Like, at the end of the day, you need to bring in a star player. And look, Jason Botterill has shown willingness to take those swings more than Ron Francis. Will absolutely give him that. But if to your point, if that decision has been made that you're going to cut corners and not take that step back, then you're going to fail every year in this kind of fashion. And it's going to make it so much harder. Well, one, because you're not going to be bad enough to get that high draft pick to draft a star like that. But then you're also going to be, the vibe is going to be so bad that you can't attract players from outside that can come fix the team. Like, it really does come down to that decision, which is why I'm really interested to see what the plan is going to be in May. And I'm hoping that the fact that it's not a season ticket holder, expiring year, that you're kind of in between that 5 and 7 year window, that hopefully that gives them the freedom or the thought that maybe they can take a step back for 1 year. But man, you're right. It really does just come down to that.
Yeah. So, like, again, everything you said was completely spot on. Like, I do not want to discount that at
Yeah.
all. It's just it ultimately won't matter if ownership doesn't get on board with what very clearly needs to happen with this team. And one another thing that's interesting about it too is when we talk about the ownership and the executive level management, Todd Lywicki, right? Like, he always brings up the Seahawks, and the work that he did with Paul Allen there,
Mhm.
and everything, and very understandable. Obviously, the Seahawks have had a great run since he was with them, and it's very relevant to this market that he's currently in. But for me, when he brings up the Seahawks, it makes him sound a little out of touch with how NHL teams work, because in the NFL it's very easy to just have a 1 year retool where you change out three or four key positions and all of a sudden your entire franchise is on a different track, and you change out the coach and that can completely change how things work for you, and you can go from a 3-win team to a 10-win team, right? Like, that is possible in the NFL in a way that's not possible in the NHL, right? Because of how the sports are played, because of the importance of different positions, and how that all works. But but Todd was involved with the Lightning and building the Lightning into what they became and everything. Like, Todd knows that, right? And that's what's really confusing about all this, is that Todd Lywicki has experience in the NHL running teams. He was president of the Minnesota Wild. He was very heavily involved in CEO of the group that managed the Tampa Bay Lightning from what, 2010 to 2018. Like, that,
Mhm.
it was a good run for them. They were pretty good in that stretch. Like, he understands, or should understand enough, what to look for and what to understand when it comes to these hockey teams. That's what's confusing to me about this situation and about the team's reluctance to rebuild and really do that hard work that is necessary, is the fact that Todd Lywicki should know better. Essentially, he's been around enough that I would think that he would understand that situation and be on board with it and communicate that then to his bosses, which would be, the true ownership group with Samantha Holloway and everybody there.
Yeah, and that Lightning team was a team just fresh when they brought him in, fresh off of Steven Stamkos first overall, Victor Hedman second overall, a team that truly bottomed out to get those stars that would eventually lead them to multiple Stanley Cups. And that hasn't changed. That's still the way it's done in the NHL. That's the way that you build a team that is successful long term. And he should know that. And I wonder where it comes from, that the idea, and it really feels like, again, and I understand with an expansion team, it's tough to be really bad at the start because you're trying to build a fan base and you're trying to grow things. But at this point, it just feels like, they're you're a gambler, right? Who's down and keeps losing hands and losing hands. Like, I'm so far down. I gotta keep playing to get even here. And it feels like every year they're just kind of making that decision, right? Where, like, well, we've been bad for so long. We got to be good. We got to be good right away. And ultimately you just keep losing. I don't know. I just, he's seen the success. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
no,
just, it's hard to explain. And then again, I understand that under Francis, it probably like wasn't, it felt like it wasn't allowed to criticize this team and everything that Ron Francis built. You always had to insist that everything was okay. And I'm sure Lewicki, again, if you have Francis there, you want to play along. You don't want to, hurt the confidence that you have in your GM if he is still the man there. But now that you're able to finally admit this stuff and talk about, how the organization has not lived up to this promise, again, why you take half measures as far as the solution. It's still, I just go back to that of like, especially when you've seen how this stuff actually works. I don't know.
I don't either. So that'll be the kind of the question moving forward, for everything, and we'll see how things shake out. Again, lots of still to discuss on everything,
Oh
and
yeah.
and the directions that the team could go in and what they're going to do and how they can approach it. I mean, there is so much there, but I think that'll do it for this week's episode of the deep dive. It is going to be another long off season. We will have plenty of time to talk about it, and it makes sense to wait and hear from Jason Botterill next week before we kind of dig into more of things on the future side of it. Just one quick clarification. He actually left the Lightning in 2015, Todd Lywicki. So 2010 to 2015. Again, though, they were in the Stanley Cup finals in 2015. Like, was around to see that growth and get them there in that first iteration. So again, my point still stands. All right. And all of this, RJ, as we talk about dysfunction, as we talk about these individuals that have to make these big complicated decisions and all of that, and fans having to put their trust into them, can't help but think of Rico, somebody that fans can put their trust in when they're going through a difficult time, when their lives may be a little bit dysfunctional because of suffering an accident and getting injured. Rico would be there for them and will help see them through that. And yeah, it just can't help but see some parallels there.
Yep, absolutely. No, definitely. And you know what? I feel more confident in Rico. I'll say that much.
Yeah, it's understandable. Well, we hope none of you ever need his services. The odds say that at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.